My name is Dr. Vera Tarman, and I am an addictions physician working out of Toronto, Canada. Today, I'd like to talk about, is AA a cult? The reason why I want to talk about this is because often when people enter treatment for the first time to deal with their alcoholism, or they just wonder if they have a problem with their drinking, they're introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a community outreach program that's in every city, on almost every block in the world. Of course, there are professional programs that exist in hospital settings, private psychotherapy, group settings, but Alcoholics Anonymous has been around the longest. It started in 1933 and continues to this day. In fact, for the first 20 or 30 years, it was the mainstay of treatment for addiction. A reaction that people have when they walk into an AA room for the first time is, number one, oh my God, this is so religious. Or they'll come in and they'll go, this is a cult. So is AA a cult? What are some of the commonalities that would make people think this? Because sure, there are some commonalities. My conclusion will be that AA is not a cult, but it's not a surprise that some people, when they walk into a room for the first time, will think that it is. Let's define what a cult is first. Cult is basically a community or a social organization that has very distinct beliefs and rituals that are typically outside of the social norm. They have unique features that are almost across the board. There's often a charismatic leader that started and then maintained the cult. There's excessive control. Those practices and rituals, like how to behave, to eat, who you hang out with, when you get to sleep, where you work, where you go to school. And another key feature is that because it is a group that's outside of the norm of society, it often involves being isolated from that society. People may live in a commune or a specific geographical area. Ultimately, the longer the person is in the cult, they find that their ties to normal society are severed. It might be first that they're not working, they're not going to the school, and now they're not seeing people anymore. Now they're not seeing their family anymore, unless the family is in the cult itself. If we look at some examples of cults, well, we heard about 1970s Charles Manson and the Manson family. That was a crowd dominated by a very charismatic individual. Another famous example would be the Heaven's Gate. This was in 1977, where 900 people under the leadership of Marshall Applewhite committed suicide because he convinced them that suicide was somehow a part of his divine mission. Another famous example was Jonestown in 1978. Ended up leading to a massacre of hundreds of people. How about the Nazis from 1933 to 1945, led by Adolf Hitler? He had visions to ultimately take over Europe. All of these features fit AA. You could make the argument that yes, possibly, Alcoholics Anonymous was started by a charismatic leader, Bill W. There was some element of control, abstinence from alcohol and other drugs, and there was some isolation from society in that people went to an AA meeting and encouraged you to stay away from people who were drinking. It had some of the benefits that cults also have. Why is it that people would go for cults? It's been shown in research that from anywhere from 0.5% to 3% of people in general have been involved in cults of some sort. 3%. We also know that women are more likely than men to join cults. The average age seems to be around 25, although that's now changing. People who are the most likely to join cults, very sheltered people who are very idealistic, or people who are going through a personal crisis. What are some benefits of cults? Why is it that people would join in the first place? The thing that draws people, especially people who are relatively isolated or are going through a personal crisis, is that it does help people when they're in a troubled time in their life. And usually people who come into AA are in a personal crisis. They're not coming for a social group. They're coming because they're struggling with their drinking. A term that's being used is love bombing. You go into a group and often it's, wow, it's so good to see you. The Moonies is a good example where they actually call that love bombing. A person is assigned to the person, hang out with them, and just give them all sorts of attention. Well, we see that with AA too. You walk into an AA meeting and there are people who are designated to be greeters. They are looking for the newcomer to make them feel welcome. And that might be similar to love bombing because, yes, we all need to be connected and to feel connected with each other. And often the alcoholic, when they walk into a room, is feeling quite isolated and full of shame. Cults give a clear purpose and sense of meaning because they've got a vision. In the case of Scientology, or in the case of Heaven's Gate, or even Jonestown, there were grand visions and people were to serve for the greater good. People believed that they were doing excessive personal sacrifices for the greater good. You could make the argument that AA has the same thing. It has a very clear purpose, which is to stop drinking. And then once you stop drinking, to help another person stop drinking. Cults often give answers for people at the existential crisis. They don't know what to do with themselves. A cult will give them a sense of mission, a sense of direction, a sense of a higher purpose. And certainly AA fulfills that criteria. It itself is more than just quitting drinking. It's also now how to learn to live well. People have called it the recipe for living. And their book, their text, their Bible, as it were, is essentially a way to forge a new life. Some similarities, and that's probably what gets people, oh, wow, I walk into a room and all sorts of people are wanting to say hello, and then they give me a book, and then they tell me to get a sponsor, and the sponsor tells me what to do. This is a cult. Is it a cult, or is it just the initial promise of what any group, including a cult, offers? Not just a cult, but any social support group, any religious group, any community group often has these very same features. It's almost as if there's a honeymoon phase. I'm going to make the argument that in the honeymoon phase, there are some similarities, but AA stops before moving into the more dangerous phases. And here's how. We have the charismatic leader. Yes, Bill W. and Dr. Bob, although Dr. Bob was always kind of in the background, Bill W. was the sort of face of AA, as it were, definitely a charismatic leader. So yes, there's a similarity there. But then we look into mind control techniques. Cults would do things like deprive a person of sleep, deprive a person of eating, deprive a person of family connection. Alcoholics Anonymous does nothing like that. There's a strong encouragement to eat well, sleep well, bring your family. There's the concept of the open meeting and the closed meeting. So the open meeting is bring in the community into the community of AA. There's transparency here. There are, yes, closed meetings. Those are the private meetings so people can share, like group therapy, as it were. You can share without feeling judged. Ultimately, there becomes an unquestioned commitment to the cause, the greater cause. And with the Alcoholics Anonymous program, the only unquestioned commitment is to your own sobriety. Yes, there are recommendations. You find a sponsor who makes recommendations, but you don't have to follow that sponsor. You can fire that sponsor and find somebody else. You can go to a group, and if you find that they're too domineering, there's complete freedom to jump from one group to another. Each group is very different. There might be 10 groups in the city that you're living in, so you're not stuck with an unquestioning commitment to any group norm other than sobriety. And even if you don't maintain sobriety, you're still invited into the meeting as long as you're not disruptive. The other thing that a cult will do is if you don't fulfill the demands and expectations, there's tremendous shame that's inflicted. Yes, it's true. People will say, if I go to an AA meeting and I relapse, there's the walk of shame when I have to go up and get that desired chip. That's the chip that you get when you say that you want to be sober for that day. That tells people, if you've been sober for 10 years, that you've relapsed, and that's embarrassing. So yes, there is this concept of a walk of shame. In the larger picture of AA, there are so many slogans that keep coming back. The newcomer is welcome. That sense of shame can be mitigated. Oftentimes people will come in feeling full of shame, and then feeling much better when they leave a meeting because they've gotten so much attention and non-judgment. You don't get any non-judgment if you are belonging to a cult. There's a tremendous amount of judgment. If you're not following the group norms, you will be shamed. If you are following the group norms, often you're exploited. And that might be financially by expecting you to pay a great deal of money. For example, Scientology, you walk in with the promise of a psychological test, and you walk out with a number of courses you're supposed to do in order to achieve their form of enlightenment. And those courses are very expensive. In other programs, you have to devote a certain amount of work hours to achieve the enlightenment that's promised. You have to do a personal sacrifice and often financial sacrifice and sometimes even physical or sexual abuse to prove your devotion. You don't see that in AA. There is no financial expectation. The most that you will get is at the end of a meeting, just like at any church where they pass the bucket and hope that you'll throw in $1 or $2, some minimal amount, which is just to pay for the rent of that room, certainly not to pay for the leader's mansion. There is no sense of a social isolation. As I said, in a meeting, we have open meetings and we encourage people to come to AA. And in terms of autonomy and identity, we'll see in cults, you'll often see an expectation that people either look the same, dress the same, behave the same. We saw that with Hare Krishna shaving the head. We saw that with the Bhagwan Rajneesh wearing the orange clothes, whether it be the shaved head or the uniform garb. They were essentially means to decrease autonomy. You lose your own individuality towards this greater group and the greater good. We don't see that with Alcoholics Anonymous at all. Members might have the same coins that they carry in their pocket, or they might put a sticker on their car. Yeah, their identity is completely intact. In summary, AA is not a cult. It has some of the features of a cohesive group that are good because we are, as humans, thrive in group in social conditions. And in my estimation, AA enhances the social needs that we have. It gives a sense of belonging. It gives a sense of safety. It gives a sense of I'm not alone and I am the same as everybody else. I'm given some direction because usually I'm coming into AA feeling lost. That's the initial positive, and AA stops there, whereas a cult will go ahead. With leadership, although Bill W. is the charismatic leader, Bill W. is long dead, and there is no leadership that has taken over. If you look at something like Scientology, Ron Hubbard died, and then his successor took over. There was no successor for Bill W. or Dr. Bob. In fact, in the 12 traditions which govern AA as a community, it says, essentially, we believe in principles before personalities. Personalities are not important. Now, they may be important within a specific group, but in the larger picture of AA, not at all. And if you don't like a particular group and that particular person, you go somewhere else. There's no financial gain. When you put in your money into the basket, it is solely to pay for the coffee and the rent of that room. And when more money is put in, distributes so that books can be free, all of the AA literature. There is nobody specifically benefiting. A number of people have said, AA has benefited me so much, I would like to will my money to AA. And the AA community has to say, thank you, but no, we do not want to get involved in accepting any money. One of the classic features about most cults is that you can't leave. If you leave, people will try to find you. There's all sorts of stories about how people have tried to leave and their life has been at risk, their financial and their reputation. They'll lose the family, may still be in the community. That does not happen in AA. You can leave and then you can come back. You can leave because you decide to go drinking or you just don't like AA. And then in a few months or in a few years, you can come back, or you can come back the next day. One of the main slogans in AA is keep coming back. Finally, Alcoholics Anonymous, the second word, anonymous, is people are asked to be anonymous. It's not because of shame or embarrassment. I belong to some secret society and I don't want people to know. Alcoholics Anonymous is premised on the concept of anonymity. You don't even use your last name. I'm Vera T, not Vera Tarman. Finally, there's no encouragement to be isolated from society. You may choose to be isolated from people who drink, but that is because your main goal is to stay sober. If you hang out with people who drink, your sobriety will be threatened. But with a fair amount of time of sobriety under their belt, they are actually able to go back into society and hang out with people who drink. The goal is not to isolate and just stay in AA rooms. That might be the choice of people in early recovery the first year, but it usually isn't the end result. That ends my talk. Is AA a cult? No, it's not. It is a social group. It has a lot of the features that actually drew people to cults in the first place, but that social organism of AA does not carry on to become more important than its members, and members are still key, still crucial. I hope you found this useful. Thank you.